for joining me this evening and my special guest, Sue Corner from Willamette University. I'll tell you a little bit about myself and then I'll introduce my special guest. So my name is Amber Thompson. I know many of you, but there are a few unfamiliar faces on the screen. So I'm an independent educational consultant located in the Los Angeles, California area. However, I do work with students across the nation. As a consultant, I work with families to help students find colleges that best match their academic, social, and financial needs. My goal is to really minimize the stress and emphasize the excitement and the possibilities of the college application process. And it is truly always an honor and a privilege to be part of a student's journey. My favorite aspect of this career is engaging in conversations with students, learning about what makes them unique, and helping them craft their authentic voice and story when they're writing their essays. And it's a good thing that that's my favorite part of this job, because we are deep in the thick of college application essay writing season right now. I'm also a mom of three. I fell in love with the college application process 5 years ago when I started exploring colleges with my oldest, who is now a college junior. I'm also a mom of a current high school senior, so I can particularly relate to the stress that families are feeling this particular year. And really, because of this, I wanted to put together this workshop to communicate ideas on how to partner effectively with your student in this journey. After all, at the end of the college search process, it really is much more ideal if students and families haven't driven each other completely crazy, and that you're actually all still talking to each other by the end of it. So for this important topic, I have invited, as I mentioned, a special guest. So we have Sue Corner here. She's here to share her wisdom and her tips for helping your student with the college journey. And Sue is actually director of recruitment at Willamette University, and she's graciously offered to share her wisdom here this evening. For the past 20 years, Sue has been working in enrollment at Willamette, which is a Pacific Northwest liberal arts college of about 1,800 undergraduate students located right across the steps of the Capitol building in Salem, Oregon. Sue is not only a graduate of Willamette, but she also happens to be the proud mom of a current Willamette freshman. And so at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Sue, who has a great presentation prepared for us this evening. So welcome, Sue.
Thanks, Amber. It's really nice to be here. I appreciate your invitation, and I appreciate just all of the things you said about why you have joined the admission consulting profession. There's so much to enjoy about this process, and sometimes that can get lost in how overwhelming it can be. And so it's great to be able to talk about ways to keep that overwhelmedness at a minimum and to really find ways to make this an enjoyable process. So I'm going to share my screen so that we can look at some very simple slides. Okay, so we're calling this top 10 tips for parents. And we're going to move through just 10 kind of general concepts or ideas and talk about them. And I'm not great at paying attention to the chat while I'm speaking, but I hope that at any time, if there are questions about what I'm talking about, or Amber, if you have additional things to pipe in on, I hope you'll all do that. It would be great for this to be interactive. So top 10 tips for parents. Excuse me. At Willamette, we certainly know that parents are critical partners in the college search process. We really are a very relational place. We're, as a small liberal arts college, everything we do is quite personalized, and we recognize that working with parents is a part of the college search process and a really important part of the college search process. So we love parent involvement. We also know that occasionally the parent role gets a little bit misunderstood, and I laughingly put the helicopter here because I think we all can occasionally these days fall into that kind of helicopter place. And so the idea is to talk tonight about things that will keep us from overstepping the boundaries that will actually damage the college search process for us and for our students. Even the best intentioned parents can get just a little bit off track if they get too involved in this process. And it really does steal some of the growth that can happen for your child at this time. And it just can cause conflict within your family at a time that you really just want to be a team. So the goal is to work against those things. So 30 minutes is about what this presentation lasts. It could go longer if there are more questions, or there's certainly time for questions at the end. 10 simple tips. And again, ultimately, a successful college search and a family that is still speaking to one another when the search is done. That's the goal here, is to think about things that will make this an enjoyable, collaborative process that is driven by the student with you as a support. So tip number 1, support the development of your students' college list, but don't write the list for them. So, excuse me, we know that many parents would love for their child to attend their alma mater. That happened to happen in my family with my middle child, not my oldest child. It certainly wasn't because I was insistent upon that. You know, sometimes that works out, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes parents really want their child to stay close to home, or maybe attend an institution that they aspired to but didn't end up going to, and so they feel they, missed out on. All of those things are understandable, but the college list needs to be developed by your student. It needs to be researched by them according to their interests and their goals, not yours. It's really important to just remind yourself that this is their experience, and some of those schools that you aspire to, or that you went to, or that you think should be on their list may just make it on their list by the time it's all said and done. If lines of communication are kept open and you have a good dialogue, they may come to see that, yeah, you're thinking really in their best interest about some of the places that might land on their list. But the more pressure you put on to add certain places, the more pushback you may very likely get. And so it's really important to let them just develop that list on their own. Now, one thing that we certainly talk about is having a balanced list. So for your student to understand that they might want to think about some places that are, there are different terms we use, but sort of a reach institution, maybe one that's just really right in their wheelhouse where profile is concerned, maybe a school or two that we would call a safety school, having some range within the list so that your student will have some choices when it's all said and done is really important. I think the same is true with balance, where financial access is concerned. Sometimes we don't know how much a college is going to actually cost for our child or for our family until you've gone all the way through the process. We don't know what the scholarships will absolutely be until you've actually applied and been admitted. So it's important to set expectations that make sense for your family about, what the resources are and what is available from the parents' standpoint, what might be reasonable to help your student understand what student loans look like. Certainly encouraging a process that would involve some outside scholarship applications if there's time for that. Helping and discussing those kinds of things, I think is a really important parent role, where creating balance within that college list is concerned. Tip number 2, I feel like this is sort of the most important tip, in my opinion. Don't pay attention to the noise around you. Just listen to your student and consider their needs. And I talk about the noise because I think we just see so much of this these days. By noise, what I mean is the parents talking about SAT scores, or that just incredible pressure within the high school community around college search, the sort of talk about right or wrong institutions to be considering. It's this intense focus on rankings or, I don't know, numbers. The game of it all that it can become, I think, gets so noisy and is so counterproductive to what really is the goal of the college search, and that is to complete a degree. If you're paying attention to all of these other things that other people are saying are important, it's so likely that you're going to mismatch yourself or your child in the college search and end up someplace where they're not going to persist and retain and ultimately gain their degree. And so it's really important to focus on who your student is and to help them be self-reflective about who they are and what makes sense for them in their college journey. For some students, that is a big school with big resources and in a certain part of the country that they know they want to be in. For other schools, for other people, it might be a small community like Willamette's. There's so many different sizes and shapes of institutions, and there's a right place. There are several right places for everyone. So to be worrying about what other people are defining as the right college search, we just need to let that go. It does not serve anyone well. There's a great resource, I think, for families who are in the midst of this process. Frank Brunei's Where You Go Is Not Who You'll Be, an antidote to the college admissions mania. Amber, I don't know if you've read this, but yeah, I think there's a lot of really good information. And it's this idea of cutting out the noise and thinking really about what matters for you. So again, I think this is probably the most important tip. I'm just looking at my notes here. One other thing that I would say, the college search process on our side of the desk as admission folks is so much of it is about context. It's about understanding who the student is. All of the different credentials that we ask for in the application, whether it's the common application or an institution-specific application, we're asking for biographical information and transcripts and lists of activities. And that's so important, essay and recommendations. And all of these things are designed to help us understand who that student is as an individual. We want to know what they've achieved, what they have, where they've struggled, what they've persevered through, where they've shown growth, where they really shine or have, strong passions. All of those things help us understand if they're a good match for our institution. And so those things speak to the individual and again, not to this idea of the pressure coming from other people. So it's important to understand that. Also, in this very, very strange year that we're navigating because of quarantine and COVID, we know that this year is going to look really different. Everyone on the college side is talking about this, that applications are going to look different. Students have not had access to some of the things that they would normally have access to, whether that's standardized tests or sports or the school musical or graded classes. It might just be pass fail. There's so much that's going to look different this year. And we're ready for that. So everyone from Harvard to the local rolling admission place around the corner, we are all in full agreement and understanding that this year is different. And so we're ready for that. We've started reading applications at Willamette, and we're already starting to see where students are helping us understand how COVID has affected them in these last several months. And it's great. It's that layer of context that we need. It's an additional bit of context, and we're prepared for it. So I mentioned that because I think part of the noise and the worry and the stress right now has to do with all of these things that are missing and this strange year. And I think people need to be reassured that we're all in it together. No one's been, separated from this experience. And so we're ready for it on the college side. Tip number 3, I kind of say this laughingly, but never say we're applying. We're not applying. It's the ultimate sign, I think, that a parent has maybe overstepped just a little bit in their thinking, maybe not yet in their actions, but in their thinking about the application process. If they go around saying we're applying, I think this pattern of thinking, though, if you go too far down that road, it's what leads to the unfortunate stuff like the varsity blues scandal. This is when parents really drift into territory that they should not be in. So you're not applying to college, your student is. They need and should and want to own this, period. They should get to do that. This, I think, process is one, it may be the first step for some, if not, it's one of many steps towards independence. That is imminent. If your child is going to go off to college, that independence is going to need to kick in. And starting that with this application process is a really good time to allow them to start taking those independent steps. Once they are offered admission to however many places they're applying to, or where they're extended admission, it's not going to be we got in, they got in, and they should get to own that too. And so I think remembering that language keeps us in check in terms of what our place is. Also, I think if you're thinking about it in terms of we're applying and you're letting this idea take too big a role in your life, it sometimes can then bleed into every single conversation that you have with your student. And I don't think that's healthy, just from a family standpoint. I think you need to think about when and how you're going to talk about this process together. Some people designate a time once a week when they say, okay, let's sit down and check in on where we are with the progress that you made this week. What can I do to support, what do we need to do this week? But having it be every single morning at the breakfast table, okay, have you written your essay yet? Or did you check on that thing? Or did you contact that school? That's not going to help. That's going to create division. It's going to add stress, and it's not your role. It's not allowing them to establish the independence and own this process as they should. So sometimes holding your tongue and waiting a little bit for those conversations is a really good thing to do. Tip number 4, again, this feels a little bit silly to say, but don't be tempted to write your student's essay or alter it in a significant way. Again, I know it doesn't seem like I should have to say that. People should know that would be an unethical thing to do, and yet it happens. We know it happens. And the essay is, as someone who has read thousands and thousands of applications for admission, the essay is my absolute favorite part of the application. It is, to me, one of the very most important components in an application. It is the place where the student's voice comes through in a way that is very different than every other part of the application file. If you think about the other things that are part of a typical application, it's lots of kind of data points. You've got biographical information, you've got a list of classes, you've got a list of grades, you've got a list of activities. It's all really important. All of it helps us establish that context that we need. When we put it all together, it really gives us a good picture of the student. But a lot of those other items are really these small little bits of data. And then you get to the essay and you open that up and it's like they started talking to us. It's like their voice comes through in a way that is really entirely unique. And so what happens if that voice is not theirs? if it's their parents or it's their older siblings or someone else has significantly altered or written that essay for them, we're losing that genuine piece of who the applicant is and what they're trying to tell us in the essay. And that's one of the main purposes of the essay, is for us to understand you and get a sense of who you are and what's important to you. The other really important component of the essay is that it's an academic measure of your preparation for college. It helps us understand the base writing ability that you have. And we need to look at that to measure if that looks like it fits our institution. And that's going to look different from institution to institution. But our understanding of your writing ability is a really important part of making that admission decision. These days, if I am reading an application that feels a little bit like it's on the margin based on the student's transcript, the courses that they've taken and the grades that they've received, the very next place I turn is their essay. It's not test scores anymore. We're fully test optional at Willamette. I look at that essay, and that absolutely can be the tipping point for, well, I wasn't so sure, and then I read this piece of writing, and I absolutely have confidence in this student's ability to do the work that we're going to ask them to do. Or it can be the other way, not sure about the transcript, and then, oh yeah, no, the essay does not support the ability we need, so they're going to go to the deny pile. So again, all of that to say, we want that match to be genuine. We want it to be authentic. And so it needs to be the student's work. Tip number 5, so you can't write the essay. You can absolutely proofread their essay. Looking for those spelling errors, the grammatical errors, those little tiny things that can be overlooked by the writer, especially if a student has been working on their essay diligently over time. They get really close to it and they can sometimes then lose sight of those little pieces that they just start to gloss over. So they need a trusted set of additional eyes to look for those things. Cleaning up or suggesting a change where a grammatical error or a spelling error is concerned, those things do not cross any sort of boundary in terms of what it's ethical to do. Those things are really important and helpful. I'm a huge advocate when I give essay writing workshops. I'm a big advocate of if the student is willing to be vulnerable and have you hear their essay or read their essay, if you're willing to read it aloud to them, rather than just read it in your head and look for errors, I think the read aloud really helps the student hear where things aren't coming through or flowing in the way that they intended. So that can be, excuse me, one of the best ways for them to assess their own writing and make some of those other changes that might be necessary. You're not suggesting them, you're just helping them hear them on their own. Tip number 6 is talking with your student about their recommenders, helping them decide which teachers might be asked for recommendation letters. This might seem like a really straightforward thing, but I think it's something that's really worthy of some conversation. And this is a place where I think parents can be involved and be helpful without, taking too much control or being too invasive. Recommendation letters are another really helpful, important layer of context that we need. And I think sometimes students, if left to their own devices, will think, well, Mr. Jones is my favorite teacher, so that's who I'm going to ask, obviously, for a letter of recommendation. Well, the favorite teacher isn't always necessarily the teacher that can best speak to the student's ability or their growth. Sometimes there's real wisdom if a student has an application that is packed with really strong coursework in the sciences, and they think they're headed to a major in the sciences, and they've even done extracurricular work that somehow is around the sciences. If that student then has a really strong recommendation letter from their AP English teacher, I look at that and go, awesome. They didn't just absolutely default to their AP Bio teacher. They sought something else to show me additional dimension to their academic preparation and ability. That's great. That's not at all to say that the AP Bio teacher isn't the right choice. I mean, that can be the right choice, but it's worth talking about. It's worth having the conversation with your student to understand kind of the nuance of all of that. I also think it's important to think about the number of recommendation letters. Different institutions obviously have different requirements around teacher recs. We, don't limit students. We say you can submit as many as you would like. However, if a student, sometimes we will see a really motivated, organized student who has submitted 7, 8 letters of recommendation. They're an outstanding student. And so everybody is willing to write them a letter. They're all great. What happens with that is we don't have time to read that many. We do have to draw some limits to the amount of time that we spend in each file. And so when there are so many, it dilutes my attention. So I'm a big advocate of, depending on, again, on how many the institution allows, but a couple of really well-chosen recommendation letters will focus my attention exactly where you want it to be. And I think sometimes it's really nice if you have that strong academic support from that teacher who knows the student well, or can speak to some growth that they've shown, or adds that dimension outside of whatever is their kind of chosen area of interest. And then balancing that with a strong letter of recommendation from an extracurricular pursuit, a choir teacher, a work supervisor, someone who can speak to some other component of the student's ability. To me, that's a really nice combination, and I have time for that combination. So, and again, I think parents can serve as such a great just kind of conversation starter around figuring that out. Tip number 7 is help your student develop a list of questions. Again, I think this is another really appropriate list or role for parents. If your student is starting to interact with colleges, whether it's through virtual information sessions, or they're setting up one-on-one interviews, or they're going on virtual tours, or even, excuse me, some very limited in-person visiting that can be happening. It's just really great if the student shows up actually informed and ready to engage about that institution. It doesn't mean you have to know everything. You're engaging with the institution so that you can learn about it. So it doesn't mean you have to know everything. But for instance, if I'm interviewing a student, which we love to do, by the way, I think virtual interviews is one of the great things that has come out of COVID and will probably stay. We didn't used to do interviews virtually, and this year we're really encouraging them, because we feel like that opportunity to have a one-on-one conversation with our applicants is just going to help us that much better understand where students are coming from. We've always liked to do as many interviews as we can, but this year, again, with the strangeness of what's happened this year, we think giving students the opportunity to actually talk to us about how things are going and where they've struggled and what's gone well. We think that's a really good thing. But it's always kind of unfortunate when somebody shows up to one of those interviews and doesn't have a lot to say, or asks something like, well, I really want to know about your nursing program. And Willamette doesn't have a nursing program. So that is just really baseline, basic homework there that should be done before you head in to that kind of one-on-one exchange. So a parent sitting down with a student before that kind of interaction and saying, okay, so what are your questions about this school? What are your questions about the search process that this person might be able to help you with? Are you ready to ask those? Have you really thought them through? I think you asking those questions that will help them develop their questions is just a perfect parent role. I also think there are very appropriate questions for parents to ask too. I don't want to sound like you have no role in any of this. Parents worry and wonder about things like safety and financial aid and housing and all of those things. And it is absolutely appropriate for parents to ask their own questions. Now, sometimes you don't want to do it on the tour or, in some way that might, for some reason, embarrass your child. But those of us who work in admission, we have an expectation that we will answer questions for parents. We want to help reassure you about your part in all of this. And so it's perfectly acceptable for you to ask questions too. You can't call us up and ask questions about your student's application. There are laws that protect us or protect your student. We can only give information to them. So we're not being difficult if you want to know more. We're just following the laws that are in place. Tip number 8 is value the college visit. I just delved into that a little bit with the last question. Visiting is really hard this year. It's different than it ever has been, but I think the investment of time and resources in visiting to affirm a choice or to understand a certain part of the country is really, really important. And sometimes it's hard because sometimes finding the time and again, the resources to visit certain colleges if they're far from home feels like just a huge additional investment in this process. And yet it's an investment in what ultimately will be a much bigger investment. And I can't tell you how many times I've met with a student who, what happens with us, Willamette is part of the Pacific Northwest 5. So there are 5 national liberal arts colleges in Oregon and Washington. And so lots of people will come to the Pacific Northwest and they'll have the 5 of us on their list. Whitman and University of Puget Sound up in Washington, Reed, Lewis and Clark, and Willamette in Oregon. People will come to visit the Northwest 5 and they'll have a very clear list in their head of which one is their top choice and which one they don't think they're really very interested in, and then the other 3 in between. They'll have that in their mind. They'll come visit all 5 of us. And by the time they go home, that is completely changed. They might still have interest in all of us, but their priorities and what they think they truly want has almost always changed. And it's because you get something from visiting that you don't get just from looking at lists or looking at websites. So the visit is important. And I say that with care because I know this year's really hard and some places you can't visit. My sincere hope is that by spring, there will be more opportunity to visit to affirm choices. It may mean applying without visiting. So casting a pretty wide net and then being able to actually visit in the spring those places that have risen to the top of your students' list. I do think that's a really, really worthwhile investment. That thing that students say about, I just, it was a gut feeling. I just knew it when I stepped on campus. All of that is really worth priority. I do think the virtual visit options that are happening are extraordinary. You can gain more information and have more interaction online than ever before. Excuse me, it's not the same, But it's a really good start, and it's a better start than students have had before. And in fact, for some, it's, it's a huge improvement. I was talking with a high school counselor a couple of weeks ago who said, this has all leveled the playing field for my students. They never really had the resources to visit widely, and now they can visit just as widely as everybody else, because everybody has that access to these online programs. So I do think there's great value in pursuing and looking into virtual visits right now. And as a parent, you can certainly encourage those and help your student understand what's available to them. Tip number 9 is just sort of summing all of these things up. I think support the process, don't run the process. There are all kinds of checklists out there for people in terms of what you need to be doing to navigate the year of application. And it's great for you to have your own checklist and to be thinking about the things that you have control of, but it's ultimately your students' process to run. They need to reach out when they have a question. They need to set up their interview. They need to be asserting that independence that will help them then once they actually transition to college. So your role is that one of a supporter, and not one who's going to helicopter or run over the process. And then tip number 10 is just become a Bearcat too. We're the Willamette Bearcats. And by that, I just mean, by the time this whole process is complete, it's spring and your student is getting ready to make that big decision, and they're excited. They just, they sign on the dotted line. That's when it's time for you, even if it's not the place that maybe you would have ultimately thought, it's time for you then to go, okay, this is great. I'm behind it. I'm going to buy my sweatshirt and put a sticker on my car, and we're going to put a pennant up, and I'm going to mark the parents' weekend on my calendar. It's really time for it then to become a family thing. It is so rewarding to watch your child become a part of a college community and thrive. And you are a barrier to that if you don't get on board once they've made this decision and they've found the place that they're ready to be. So that's the last thing any of us wants. We want them to complete, we want them to thrive. And so we need to become a Bearcat too. Those are my tips. I didn't stop and leave time for questions in the midst of all of that. I just kind of took off. But I would love to answer questions. I'm going to take myself off screen share so we can see everybody. I'd love to answer any questions. And I know Amber may have lots of additional points that she would like to make in terms of some of these things.
Yeah, no, that was all wonderful. Thank you. I am continuously learning in this process, and always appreciate hearing directly from the admissions reps who are living and breathing this in an entirely different way than families are, or even myself as a consultant. So I really, really cherish hearing your perspective and all of your insight. Let's see. If anyone wants to just unmute, you can certainly do that to ask a question, or you can pop it in the chat and I will read it off. Don't be shy.
One thing, while we wait to see if any questions pop up, one thing that people have been asking so many questions about this year, this isn't specific necessarily to parent involvement, but I know it's a worry for parents too, is, these standardized test scores are just such a worry for everyone, because access has been hard. And there's confusion over which schools are requiring tests. What does test blind mean versus test optional? Is it really not going to hurt me if I don't submit test score? There's just so much stress around this. So I would say, just from my standpoint, again, it's part of that kind of universal preparation that I think the college side is taking, which is we're ready for this year to look different. And for many institutions, that means truly being test blind this year. They're just not going to look at test scores. They aren't going to factor in. Willamette has been test optional for a number of years because we just don't see a correlation between test scores and achievement. The step we're taking this year is that there is no, the test score doesn't factor in to, even if you submit it, it's not going to factor into the merit scholarship either. We've kept it out of the admission process, but we've still factored it into merit scholarships in the past, and this year we're letting that go. So I think it's really important to ask questions or look at the website to know what different schools are doing. I also think, I just put in the chat, fairtest.org is an excellent resource for understanding which schools are test optional. It's, in my experience, the most up-to-date resource because test optional has changed a lot, especially over the last several months. So that's a really good resource to look to see which schools are not requiring test scores at all.
Great. Yeah, thanks for popping that website into the chat window. I remember back in March and April and May, every day there was just a slew of new schools that were going test optional, and it was impossible to keep up with all of the changes. I feel like almost everybody is test optional going forward for this particular year. I do have one question that's come through. We have a question that is, how significant or crucial are having AP class records on your application?
So it's going to vary from school to school. For a place like Willamette, we look, when we're assessing academic preparation, we're looking for a student that has demonstrated in some way that they are motivated academically and that they've tested their ability just a little bit. If a student takes just a fully regular track curriculum, they might get straight, have a perfect 4-point in all just regular, no honors, no AP, no IB, nothing. So they've met all their graduation requirements. They've done really well in all those classes. We're not sure if that student is going to thrive at Willamette or not. It's a little bit hard to tell with just that regular track curriculum. So if there's an AP program at that student's school, we will have expected that they would take at least a few of those classes. It doesn't mean they need to take every single AP class. It doesn't mean they need to get a perfect 4-point in all of those AP classes. But for them to have shown that they're motivated enough to test themselves and that they're willing to step into some of that rigor, that's pretty important for us. And I think that would be for a lot of institutions like us that, admit, 60, 70% of their class or less than that. It's going to be important to see a little bit of that rigor. Now, AP test scores. So that's just seeing the AP class on the transcript. It's seeing that the student is interested in and willing to take that class. The test is a whole different thing. I don't care at all if the student ultimately takes the test. The test at Willamette will, if it's a 4 or a 5, will result in credit. And so that might help the student figure out some ways to lighten their load while they're at Willamette. It might help them be able to, study abroad more easily because they can take one less class in that semester. There's different advantages to having that credit that they bring with them. But actually taking the AP test, that doesn't mean a lot to me. It's more about navigating the day-to-day rigorous coursework and doing well in that on a day-to-day basis. That's Willamette's answer. Other institutions, highly selective institutions, they have to say no to so many of their applicants that they're going to look for those sorts of things because they have to measure everything. I don't envy their jobs. It would be so hard to say no to 9 out of 10 students. So in those cases, I think if that's what you're aspiring to, trying to have that test score is probably pretty important.
Great. Thank you for that very well-rounded answer there. We've got another question about how do you suggest helping student motivation? This particular parent has a junior son, and spring break college tours were canceled last year, like several of us lost our summer or our spring break college trips. And she's just having a hard time getting him motivated and interested in the college search process, and really encouraging him to take the lead in it. So do you have any wonderful tips for helping us out of this funk that some of us are really in due to the pandemic?
It's really hard, and I don't have there's not a magic pill. I do think, even in a normal year, I think advice is often people can drag their feet in even when they can visit. Sometimes students are hesitant to do that. They don't really want to get going. And then it takes one visit and then they go, oh, this is interesting. And then they start to want to dip their toe in a little bit further. And so I think there can be some of that even in this virtual realm of just attend this one event. Let's look at one school that you think you're interested in, and let's see if they have an open house or, an information session or something that you could attend. And let's see if that piques your interest and what that might lead to. I think it's that dipping your toe in and starting somewhere that can actually often awaken the motivation. Now, you have to somehow drag them to that or get them to that very first experience. But if you do, sometimes that really does, excuse me, move things along. Beyond that, I don't know. Motivation is hard right now. It's just hard for everything. I guess one thing we've talked about in my house, I have a junior daughter, high school junior. So there's the freshman daughter and then this daughter who's a junior. And she has started doing some virtual visits and she's enjoying them. She's not one who's dragging her feet. The motivation that she's trying to find is, how can I figure out ways to make sure that there's content on my application that would have been there had I been in the school play and been in the choir, and the things that she normally would be filling her time with, she's not in the same way. So she's trying to figure out, how do I get creative about doing some other things that will help colleges see that I'm an interested, motivated person, but it's hard for her to know what those things are. And so she's trying to develop she's trying to motivate herself to think of what else she can do, how she can serve, how she can, be involved in some way. And she's having to think that through. I'm helping her. We're talking about it, but ultimately she has to figure out what her involvement is going to be and how she's going to motivate herself. It's hard. Amy, are you raising your hand?
Hi, thanks, Sue. This has been a great presentation. I have a question. We're a little earlier in the process than some may be, but have been curious about. I think you just touched on this a little bit, but extracurricular activities and whether there are sort of specific like range of activities that you're looking for, that you think that colleges are looking for in that space? Or if we're parents partnering with our kid and we're suggesting, think about getting involved in this and this and this, or is there a point at which it's too much? And I'll say that, our son is doing some sports and some volunteering. He just doesn't seem to have a lot of interest in clubs, for example. There's just nothing that seems to draw him. And there's a real, I don't know, clubs seem pretty gendered at our high school. Is something that I don't know, that just a lot of, it seems to be kind of like a girls' universe. And I don't know, like, so we're just curious as to whether that's, you see that, is sort of deeper dive in a couple of areas, a nice balance to something like that? Or are you really looking for those kind of commitments within the school community?
No, I love that you asked this question, because I think the activities section of the application is one that it's changed so much over the course of my years in admission. I think we used to just see such a focus on those really traditional school-related activities. Everything in that section was sports or music or drama or student government or a special club, but school-related club. It was all very kind of narrowly defined extracurricular activities that were connected to the school. And now, if you do really think about again, I keep saying the word context, but it's all about developing that context and understanding of who the student is and where they're coming from. We want that activities section to list so much more than just school-related stuff. So the service, church, outside athletics, there's so much more now that students do that's athletics outside of the school. It's a job. Absolutely, we want to know about jobs or internships. I see students list travel sometimes if they've had a significant opportunity with their family. Things like really significant hobbies. I've come across a student before who's listed falconry. Whoa, okay, that wouldn't fall into just a traditional, it wasn't a student club, but it's something they pursued. There was, I've seen students who pursued their pilot's license while they were in high school. Wow, that's super interesting. If they had been using just that narrow lens for what really belonged in that section, I might not have known that they had that incredible, really significant interest and passion. So, jewelry making, whatever it might be that a student chooses to do and does with their time that isn't already devoted to academic work, that's what we want to know. And so just given those parameters, maybe there are more things that come onto your radar that your son is involved in. I don't think joining a club just for the sake of this will look good on my application is the right way to go. Their time is too precious. You want content on that page, but it needs to be genuine content of things that they're truly interested in and passionate about. And so I think they need to find that. And it's harder to find it this year. It just is. Like, that's what my daughter is trying to figure out. It's harder. But I think we'll be that much more excited about it when we see it, when we see those things on the applications of these students coming through this year and next year, those who've had a deficit because of this year. It will be that much more impressive when we see, when we see those things listed. And if it's something that doesn't fit into the activities section per se, where you're pretty limited, and I'm speaking from the common application because that's what we use, but I think many applications are similar. You're kind of limited in what you can put in the activities section. The Common App has the additional information section that comes right after the essay. And I love it when someone uses the additional information section for anything that they choose to tell me. You know, I chose to take, I would have taken AP French and honors choir in my senior year, but they were both only offered in the same period. And so I chose choir because I love it so much, but I didn't want you to think that I wasn't interested in that final year of language. You know, they just clarify something about their transcript, or my transcript looks different in my sophomore spring because my grandma got really sick and it placed this extra burden on our family. Oh, that is so helpful for me to know, because otherwise I would have been looking at your transcript and wondering what happened. You know, sometimes we will see students put something in that area about, you know, it didn't fit in the activity section, but I want you to know that I spent time throughout high school doing a literature review of movies and books because I'm such an avid movie fan. And so that's just a really important hobby to me that has contributed, I think, to my ability to write and think and, you know, understand culture. Whatever it might be, that section can be really helpful in our understanding these students. So I think you want to pack all of those things in anywhere you can, because it just adds dimension.
Thank you. That was really helpful.
Great. Well, thank you. I really appreciate that answer. We do have two other questions. So one is sort of pandemic related, and how are you looking at students' applications this year? Is there a little more leniency, say if there's a grade lower than perhaps has ever been on the student's transcript, perhaps, you know, due to the pandemic? And then the final question is just, how do you look at students who are applying undecided? Is there any, is that a negative attribute in their file at all? Or, you know, how do you view someone who comes in as an undeclared major?
Those are both great questions. Yeah, I think we're very prepared to see some blips that are unusual in transcripts from, you know, this spring or fall. I think we're very prepared to understand that students are struggling in certain ways, and there will be leniency. And I'm speaking not just for Willamette, but lots of institutions. This is a big conversation happening among my college colleagues. There has to be some concessions made for the fact that everyone has scrambled to adjust to this new reality, and students are at the heart of it, and they're having to scramble too. So yes, I think if a student, you know, got a D in history, and that is out of the norm for them, I'm going to look at that in a different way than I might have, you know, in years past. If that's an outlying thing, there are some times when that as an outlier wouldn't hinder admission anyway. It could just be an outlier, and everything else is really a good indication of ability to do the work. In this year, if that happens, you know, all the more concession for it. So I think you don't want to ease up on trying. I think students really do need to continue to do their best. You don't want to use this as an excuse. However, everybody behind this process is human, and we're expecting there to be some differences. What was the other question?
Yeah, and the last one is about if a student is coming in as an undecided or an undeclared major.
Oh, right.
How does the admissions office look at that student?
Yeah. Again, this could vary at other institutions. Willamette is a liberal arts college. And so our expectation is that most students come in, we say kind of exploring, or undecided. We ask students about their interests because we want to be able to give them as much information as they want about certain subject areas. but no one applies to a major. No one comes into the school already locked into some kind of path. So we don't care if you have 10 departments you're interested in, or one department you're interested in, or you just have no idea. Our faculty certainly see it as part of their job to help students figure out what major makes sense for them. And, we know the national statistics on the rates at which students change their mind about their major are just very decisive. I think it's over 90% of students across types of institutions. So not just at liberal arts colleges, but all types of institutions, all sizes and shapes. It's over 90% of students change their major. And on average, they change it three times. So it's really common for students to come in with maybe an idea and then shift from that, or just not have an idea at all. And that's okay. I think it's really hard to know what you want to do with your life when you haven't even been exposed yet to many of the subjects that are available at the college level. So undecided is fine. It's one of the reasons that I think it's a tricky thing to have your major be a big driver in your college search. You want to be exploring things that you think you're interested in, and yet you don't want your entire college decision to rest upon a certain major, in my opinion, simply because of these statistics on the mind-changing thing. You don't want to be so locked into something that you then find yourself at the wrong institution if you change your mind. So it has to be a piece of the puzzle, but not the whole driving force.
Wonderful. That's a great answer. And I think that that's a really wonderful way to sort of conclude this evening and really make an emphasis on this whole process is really crucial to acknowledge that your student is going to change and grow throughout the entire process. So what your student's doing as a middle schooler or in ninth grade may not be what they continue to do in 11th and 12th grade. So as parents and families, we really need to give them room for that exploration and to give them permission to experience change and to grow from that. So I just want to thank you so much, Sue. This has been a phenomenal evening. You have shared so much advice and tips and wisdom from your years as not only a parent, but in the admissions office. And just want to, again, thank you so much for your time. And I appreciate that you answered everyone's questions. I think we covered a lot this evening. So any parting words?
Just thanks for having me, Amber. I really appreciate it. I love talking about the college search process, and I'm really happy to be a resource. Not just about Willamette, obviously, but just about the college search. So I'm easy to track down on Willamette's website. Feel free to get in touch if I can be of help in any other way. I just really appreciate that people were here, and hope that you can take something away from this that will be helpful for your family. So thanks so much.
Yeah, and I think that's a great note, Sue. Folks in the admissions office really are approachable, and they want to hear from students and families if you have questions. And especially in this day and age, you're not out traveling so much, so
Right.
We appreciate that you're available to do these kinds of special events in this time. So
Yeah.
wonderful. Well, thank you everyone for coming, and I'll let you sign off. And thanks so much. And I will send out a recording soon.